Life Over Coffee. Conversations for Transformation.
Hello, everyone. This is Rick Thomas with Life Over Coffee. Thank you so much for joining me. I have a special guest that I want to introduce to you. Her name is Sophie Ottaway. But when I say her name, this is a bit confusing to me as well. I read her story. In fact, she wrote her story or part of her story on the Daily Wire. Now, that article that she wrote is behind the paywall. But I did read it, and I'm going to put some links in the show notes here because I want you to know her. And there are several YouTube videos that, in addition to what we are about to do right now, to where you can learn about Sophie, you can learn about her story, and I want her to tell it. That's why I'm not saying so much at this point, but just let me give you the most succinct way. Sophie was born a boy, and at two days old, there was a physical abnormality that she will talk about, and she was engineered to be a girl. And so now she's 37, I think, years old. She found out later in life that she's actually a boy. And so this is the confusion that we're having here. And so I'm navigating through this. We didn't do a lot of talking beforehand. I told her I didn't want to because I really want to work this out in front of you. I think it would be quite interesting because we live in a crazy culture, as you all know. And so we have a situation here, and I sent her an email. I said, hey, I want to talk to you. And she graciously responded. And so here we are. And so, Sophie, welcome to Life Over Coffee. Let's start there.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, as you all notice, that one of us talks funny, one of us has an accent, and it's not me. As you can imagine, Sophie is from the UK, and I'm from the southern part of the United States. And so English, Sophie, English is my second language. Redneck is my primary language. And so there's going to be some communication issues because your English is actually proper. Mine is not. But we'll navigate.
I think I'm a British redneck, Rick.
A Brit redneck. Okay. All right. I'm kind of speechless. That's unusual. All right. So Sophie, all right. So first of all, I don't know where to go here. I don't know what's proper. And so I'm just going to ask questions. And if you don't want to answer the questions, just say, I'd rather not to answer because I'm flying blind in your situation because I didn't think there was even a category for you until I read your article. And it's like, oh, this is a little bit of a different category because this is not something that you volunteered for. This was something that was foisted upon you as a 2-year-old and a 2-day-old. And as I was reading your article, I mean, honestly, I teared up as I was reading your article because I saw you in the ICU looking kind of toward the camera, a little baby. And again, you can see this if you have access to the Daily Wire article that Sophie wrote. But I was looking at you as this infant with the bandages and so forth, and in the little incubator kind of thing, whatever it is. And I just teared up because of your vulnerability, your total dependency on others to make decisions about your young life. And there were decisions made, and as you're going to share here in a moment, you realize many years later what had actually happened. And so, all right, so the first question I have for you, and again, please, I'm flying blind here, so just say, I'd rather not answer that because there's such sensitivities around this subject. But you go by Sophie Ottaway. You look like a girl. Are you a boy or a girl?
I think that's a really good question. I think I'm actually going to say, for the sake of my sort of political stance on all of this, I'm going to say that I am a boy. We can't argue with the fact that I am a boy. So when they dig up my dead body from, hopefully in many, many, many years' time, but someone digs up the body, it's an XY chromosome. And when all the flesh is gone and when all of the exterior is gone and my soul's gone wherever my soul goes, fundamentally that I can't argue with fact. I am a male. And I guess there's lots more questions to fall off that, but I'll end that there. And also, don't worry about your line of questioning, Rick. Like, I'm at a point with this where I'll talk about anything. Like I just want the world to sort of know me and my story. So any question is good.
Well, I appreciate that, and I am the same way. I tell people that as I said to you before we start, I'm an old man, so I have an element of I don't care anymore. I mean, I care appropriately. I care about discretion and moderation and not just being a fool. But as far as being transparent, yes, I want to be an open book, and I appreciate that about you. But see, your answer to that question is what puts you in a category, and as in a unique category, and maybe the word is unique, as in there's nobody else in it. But I would imagine there are others. But that would be important for them to hear your story, because it's like there could be people in your situation where it's like, no, I'm a boy, I'm a male, and this is what happened to me. I appreciate you not negating the reality of the matter, and as you say, from an anthropological or anthropological perspective, when they dig up your bones, yeah, you're going to be a girl, and they probably will not know all this other stuff, this biographical sketch. And so I appreciate your honesty with saying that. But now, so that leads to the next question. I think I could probably answer it, but I want to hear you say it or to answer it in your own way. But you go by Sophie Ottaway, and you manifest as a girl, and I said 37, is that correct?
That's right. I'm 37, Rick. And when I found out that I was actually born a boy, I was 22. So I've had the knowledge around about 15 years now.
Yeah. And so why do you go on as Sophie Ottaway, and why do you present yourself as a girl? And please, I'm going to say this for the last time. I'm a bit uncomfortable because I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to
great
hurt.
Question.
Okay. All right.
I'd be upset if you didn't ask the question, Rick. If you didn't ask that question on this podcast, I'd be upset, because I think that's that's why we're here, to try and unpick
okay. All right, I'm going to stop apologizing. And so, why do you present yourself as a girl when factually, biologically, ontologically, you are a boy?
So I guess when you find that information out at 22, having lived, I haven't been programmed to believe that you are something that you're not, and your whole world knows you as Sophie, and your whole world knows you as this body, albeit quite a bit fatter at the time, but it knew me as me. You're faced with an impossible situation whereby, and obviously I've weighed up all of the thoughts. I know that I'm male. I know chromosomically, I also know that my attractions are towards females. I know that. And all this is an outer shell. As we say, the chromosomes will always be the same. The heart and the head, that will always be the same. And I didn't have any choice in the presentation, but to get that far in your life and you have to start to make those decisions, I thought, well, what would going back to male? I say back to because I'd never actually lived as someone with a consciousness as male. From the moment I knew of the world, everything about my world was you're female. So it was learning something new, but it made sense and it clicked. But to go back, the systems that I disagree with is probably the wrong word, but the systems that I think abused me, and the kind of the hormones that they pump into you and the surgeries that they do. I've obviously been a customer of those surgeries, an unwilling customer, but I was a customer of those services for many years. And if you go to, let's say you go to your local restaurant and you buy a meal, if you don't like that meal, you're not going to go to that restaurant again. You're probably going to rethink your options. And for me, I could never be wholly physically male, because the testes were taken off and your body sadly can't regrow testes. And the split penis, again, that was taken off and gone. You can't get that back. So what we're looking at here is, well, I could pump some hormones into me, I could pump some testosterone into me, but they're synthetic. That's a big pharma product. I've got no trust in big pharma at all. And the idea of pumping something quite dangerous into my body, when I know that the estrogen that I had for many years caused me so many problems, I was very reluctant to go and take the opposite version of that, which is still synthetic. So I was against the idea of the surgeries and against the idea of the synthetic hormone. And obviously my body, in the absence of testes, can't create its own hormone to make me physically male. Although what I can say is, since I've stopped taking the estrogen 3 or 4 years ago, I do feel as though my female features have almost gone slightly more androgynous. You know, I've noticed a change in just not taking the estrogen. But for me, it's kind of the conundrum that you can never be wholly male, you can never be wholly female. So who are you? And I've kind of gone on that route of exploring, who is Sophie? Who is this person? And I've just decided thereby that I don't really want to change the outer skin. And that's not because I want to deceive anyone. I don't want to deceive anyone at all. I just want to be me with the least possible interaction with the health service and big pharma as humanly possible, and to just be authentically me as a person. And I think that this is the best way, or the only way, that I can actually achieve that.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I just did not think that I would ever have this position, because I've never considered this position. But I've spent a lot of time over the past week thinking about you. Excuse me. But
Life's good now, mate. Life is good. Life is very
no,
good.
I know that. But you're a different category. And as I've talked about you, I said, this is odd, as I would tell my wife, for example. But I agree with the position that you're taking, because you were engineered to be something that you're not. And I think that one of the reasons that it's so easy to agree with you is because you're being honest. I mean, you are being honest, and that is the difference that separates you. People who are pretending to be something, and they're forcing that label that, I mean, even is punitive, and is becoming more punitive as they're legislating this concept, this ideology. But it's your honesty that makes you so agreeable. And so if you were my daughter, if you were my child, and if that happened, I would not want you to be re-engineered. And especially when you talked about it in the article, you said it here, your mistrust and distrust of big pharma for obvious reasons, but you have experienced it in a way that none of us can even imagine unless they have been transitioned like you. And we can talk about the Reimer twins a little bit later, but that's how you finish your article, as they say, as you say. I mean, if they're not going to believe us, who are they going to believe? And so I believe you. I agree with the position that you're taking to go back and be re-engineered. It's a big ask, and I think it's too much to ask. I want to go back historically and get the chronology moving forward, but I just really want to ask, so when you meet someone like a guy who finds you attractive, how does that work?
Well, I guess because I know that I'm attracted to women, and I, I have had relationships with males in the past, obviously mostly prior to finding out what I found out. But when I talk to somebody new nowadays, which I guess I rarely do, but when I do, I try to be upfront and honest. But up until December 2021, I never told another person, considering I had this knowledge at that point for 13 years. I'd never spoken about this to anybody in my world, nobody. I understood what had been done to me. I understood the lie. And when I found out that information, I knew that I couldn't process that. I knew that I wasn't in a position where, if someone else knew this knowledge, that I could answer the questions and I could, deal with the spotlight on me, because I knew it was a big thing and I knew I couldn't process it. So the last few years, I've been very honest when I've met somebody new about everything, the whole story. And that morally, that is the only way to go, to be honest. That person needs to know who they're engaging with. And where I've not done that in the past, to anyone that might be watching this that might have known me, I can only apologize for that. I was never trying to deceive anybody.
Right.
It was the fact that I couldn't process that knowledge. And as far as I'm aware, if you look at the birth certificate, I think they rushed the surgeries to get female on the birth certificate. But that's something I battle with. I battle with a lot. And I've not spoken about this anywhere else, actually. I do battle a lot with the idea that, you know, you really should have spoken to people about this earlier for various reasons, you know, for transparency, for trust. You can only build something proper where there's full trust and openness between two people. But everyone in my life now knows everything about me. And that's the only way it's going to happen going forward. If you just meet a friend, let's say you meet a friend somewhere and they're chatting to you and you get talking, it's not the first thing I bring up. I kind of treat it a bit.
Right.
Yeah. Hi, I'm
Right.
so fancy a beer. By the way, they chopped my dick off. I mean, it'd be really difficult, Rick, wouldn't it? It'd be really hard. So I kind of play with it a bit now. It's my, you know, play with the humor a bit. It's how I get through in life. But
Well,
now
I want to get to how you got to this mental space, because you do seem to be in a good space now. But I did want to comment on about communicating truth and hiding truth. I think you may know that I come from a Christian perspective, and so I interpret things through that lens. And so in the Bible, it talks about, there's this idea of Jesus withholding the truth. He said that there's many things that I would like to tell you now, but you're not able to bear them. In the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they call it the Messianic secret, where he kept this secret because he considered his audience. And so it wasn't about lying. It wasn't about being deceptive. It was about consideration. And so it's also the same when you have children and you're going to have the sex talk with your children. You don't do that at 2, but are you hiding the truth from them? No, you're not. There is a time to communicate truth in an appropriate way. And so it's not about hiding the truth or revealing the truth primarily. It's about the motive of your heart. What is the intention of your heart? And so as I listen to you, the intention of Christ's heart was, you know, I know that you can't handle, you know, as Jack Nicholson said, you can't handle the truth. And Christ was saying a similar thing. And so you knew the truth, but there were a couple of things that you had to wrestle with. One, you had to come to the place to where you can be okay with it. And that's not something that you can flip a switch. It's like, oh, I'm a dude, I'm okay with that. Next. No, that takes time. But then as you wrestle with it, now you have to work through how to communicate this to other people. But I don't see that as being deceptive at all, because the motive of your heart's in the right place, because you're not trying to, as I ask you, are you a boy? You say, yes, I am. And so you're not trying to be deceptive, but there is discretion, and there a way of socially communicating things, and it seems like you went through those beats appropriately, and so that's just a non-issue to me. Now I forgot, I did remember in the article, because you just said it a while back about being gay, or you implied that you like girls, but that was confusing to you when you were younger. It's like, I'm a girl and I like girls, so obviously I'm a lesbian. And so when I was asking you if guys you know, come on to you or whatever, but I forgot, it's actually girls that you like, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I guess the same question, if a girl chats to me, I guess nowadays I treat it like what happened, I see it as a crime that happened to me, like a medical crime, right? But crimes happen to everyone, sad crimes. You have victims of domestic abuse, don't you? You have victims of rape, you have victims of all sorts of nasty things. And I kind of treat this the same way. So like, you meet someone in a bar and they're talking to you, and you get on a social level. And and that's cool. But they've just got to know you. They're not going to tell you about how their first partner verbally abused them and beat them around, but they might do 3 or 4 meetings down the line when they've built trust in you. So I treat this the same way. Do you know, you get talking to someone, you get the vibe. If you like them, you might go for coffee, whatever. And then, 2 or 3 meetings in, well, nowadays, I guess that's not a problem because they put me in Google, and I don't even have the job anymore, right? I won't even have to have the job. Not that I need the job, but yeah, nowadays I just have that conversation a few meetings in, and even if it's just a friend, because you don't want to burden them with that trauma either. You want to I want them to get to know me as Sophie, not me as the crazy medical experiment, because that's just 1% of who I am, really.
How do people normally respond to you when you have the big reveal?
Do you know what? It goes anything from like mostly compassion, kindness, like 90% kindness. Oh my God, I can't believe this happened to you. We love you who you are. Like, all that matters is that you're a good person. Then you've got a small percentage, 2 or 3%, that's you're making it up. It's a lie. This could never happen. The systems around us could never allow this to happen. And I look at you and you look like a girl. And you almost get to the point where you think, well, I dropped my trousers in the pub, but I don't. Don't worry, I would never do that. That's far too much. I would never do that. I just let them go on the merry way and think, if you want to live in your own world, well, that's fine. Sorry, I've gone too far there, Rick.
No, you haven't gone too far. Now, if you drop your trousers, you well,
that's a ban from the landlady, Rick, I think, in the pub. Definitely. That would be a ban. And I don't want another ban. She's good to me. She's got cheap drinks.
The friend people who knew you all of those years, and then they knew you as a girl, and then you told them, how did that go?
Do you know what? They were shocked. They were shocked. They were shocked by the news, but all of them, pretty much every last one, said, we always knew that there was something that you weren't letting us into, because they grew up with me while I focused all of my attention on career and business, because in my mind, this is going to be a whole box of worms trying to navigate this sort of emotional life with this. I'll just bury my head into money. And as a religious man, that you're never going to find your happiness in money, because money is probably the root of all evil. It's why I'm here today in the situation I am today. But when they found out, they basically said that it was the drug abuse made sense. In my past, I don't abuse drugs now, but the drug abuse in my past made sense. Depression, alcoholism. It was the missing part of the jigsaw for them. So they were very easy to accept it, and they were very warm and kind, and they just basically put a big arm around me, everybody, we're here for you, and I'm so sorry that we didn't know. But I said, it's my fault. I didn't tell you. I could have told you. I just didn't know how.
Yeah, you made an excellent statement. I'm actually looking at the article here, is why I'm looking down, and I can't find it, but maybe you can recall it, because you're talking about money, career, jobs, and there was a phrase that you used that spoke to, this doesn't fulfill, this doesn't satisfy. Do you remember money? I began to speculate that my surgery, no, that's there's something else, but you came to a place that even me, especially me as a religious man, we know this, that those things are empty, they're hollow, and they do not satisfy. And I thought it was so interesting that you came to that place, because you got lost, as you said, in pursuing, running from the reality, trying to find your spot in life, and then you circled back around to, this is who I am. And then you started living in the truth of it. But as you were in that process, it was just a wonderful reality, a moment of clarity that you had, that this career, vocation choice, money, etc. You just said it in an excellent way. And anyway, it's in the article, but you did come to that spot, and I thought that was really wonderful. I was really impressed. So what I want to do, because my questions are I'm like a wild pony on the hillside. Let's go back. All right, so you're born, you're a guy. What is the technical abnormality, physical abnormality, a split penis, but what is the technical name for it?
It's called cloacal exstrophy, and that's CLOACAL, and then it's exstrophy. and it's a sort of a severe version of bladder exstrophy. So bladder exstrophy is where the bladder is outside of your body, and cloacal exstrophy is quite a lot more severe than that. So in my case, it was bladder and bowel outside of the body, split penis. I think there was actually a lack of anus. They had to create an anus, I guess. And there was also some people have problems with the hip structures, which I didn't have. But essentially, it was a male birth with lots of genital abnormalities and bladder and bowel abnormalities. It's 1 in 400,000 live births, which doesn't sound like a lot. But a couple of years ago, I connected with a charity in America, actually, that specialise in looking after people with cloacal exstrophy. And I had a few chats with them and things, and they were people will come forward, I'm sure, over time, but there are many, many, many more me's. There isn't just me. I've personally met a couple of me's, but I would speculate that there's probably 500 me's in existence. And that's before we start to look at the intersex movement, where for a long time, and it still goes on in many places, but where the doctors were making a decision based, rather than leaving that child be, they were making a decision, which many people have reached out to me since going public on this to say that they found out later in life that they were born and the doctor had made the wrong decision, and they knew that the whole way through, being intersex. So there's many disorders, but mine is cloacal exstrophy. Sorry, that was a very long answer, Rick, very long-winded.
Yeah, and I think the intersex demographic would probably be the closest that aligns with this condition that you're talking about. And so the doctors talk to your parents, and we can talk about your parents later, but you're okay with your parents, and we can, talk through, how you came to that place. But at 2 days old, the doctors are talking to your parents, and did they convince them that this is the way to go?
Pretty much. I think so. I was born, and obviously you've got a baby where the organs are on the outside of the body, and we're in a day when we can't just go in our phone and look on Google and see what other people are doing. They were in a situation where they needed to act fast, or there was a time pressure. We need to get this baby into surgery to rectify things. And the surgical team, there was a senior consultant who's now passed away, and there's a junior consultant at the time who's now retired, because we're obviously 37 years on. And the story goes, obviously I wasn't there. I mean, I was there, but I wasn't compos mentis enough to hear the conversation. But the story goes that they'd pretty much said it'd be incredibly difficult for this person to grow up with a split penis, erectile dysfunction, to be able to go to the bath. If incontinence is going to be a long-term thing, then to use the men's bathrooms and all that kind of thing. They were selling it as the best solution for this baby. Obviously, the more I've learned, I think that's utter rubbish, that it was the best thing, because they never actually fixed the original problem in the whole 37 years of my life. But yeah, the cell was, and they felt safe in these doctors' hands. Doctor had an answer whereby without the doctor, they just thought this baby was going to die, and they tried really hard for a baby. It wasn't the easiest thing, it'd been a long road for them to have me. So I think they were very keen not to lose me.
Do you have siblings?
No, only child. So I was obviously the first child, being the only child. They did consider having a second child a few years after my birth, and they had something called genetic counselling, which I'm not entirely sure what that is, but I think that's where they talk about the chances of a second baby being born with the same problems due to the two pieces of genetics in my mum and my dad, those unique sets of genetics. Could they be the reason, if you put those two people together again, is it going to create a carbon copy of the same? And nobody could actually give them a green light or a red light on that. No confirmation as to the chances of that happening. So they made the decision not to. But my mum tells this story whereby at one bit they had really thought about going for another child, but she kept having nightmares in the middle of the night whereby she just had a new child. But I was really sick, because as a child in my sort of, I don't know, up until about age 8, I was in and out of hospital quite a lot with various things. And my mum had this fear whereby she was so busy looking after the newborn baby that she couldn't attend to my needs properly. And she said that she couldn't live with that. And that's what stopped her actually going forward to having a second child.
How many operations have you had?
That's a good question. I wish I knew, So after my birth, also I have to rely on hearsay, because my medical records I've only got from 1998, and I was born in 1986. And I am absolutely certain that the reason I don't have my medical records is not because someone doesn't have them, it's because they don't want me to have them.
Right.
I don't mean my parents, I mean the medical system,
Right.
because that's something I've seen in many stories of people I've been talking to, an inability to access medical records that are in fact there. I've forgotten your question, Rick. I'm sorry.
How many
Can you
surgeries
repeat?
have you had? How many surgeries have
Oh,
you had?
so I reckon, I mean, I should know the answer to this, but there was 4 or 5 big ones as a child. So there was the birth surgeries, which there was, I think, a couple of very big operations. And then I know that I got taken back in because at 2 days old, my mum and dad had just signed for like rectification, make this baby safe, but they'd agreed they were going to go the female trajectory. But obviously, when this, as you will have read in the Daily Wire article, they a few weeks after those surgeries, this balloon, as my mum describes, a balloon falling into my nappy, which was this pseudo vagina that they didn't know they'd put in me, had prolapsed. So then there was another surgery there to obviously, I think, put that back in and reabsorb it. And there was 2 or 3 tweak sort of surgeries. But then as I went into my childhood, I had a lot of problems with they like sort of almost like stones in the urethra, because the urethra that they'd had to reformulate is very corrugated, so the urine would collect in the corrugations of the urethra and it would block the passage of the urine. It would start to back up to the kidneys. So there was quite a few times where I'd have to go to hospital with urinary tract infections or kidney infections, and they'd have to sort that out. But then if we fast forward to adult life, I've made it my mission to stay the hell away from the hospital. And I haven't. The last operation I had was just a cystoscopy in my early 20s to take a look at what was going on. Just to look at my body internally. They basically put a camera through your urethra. They have a look around. And I think this was just before I actually found out about my birth sex. Either just before or just after. It was around about that time.
So the vagina, they don't sew it in. I mean, how does that work? I mean, they just inserted it, and how does that work? How does it
I
fall
wish
out?
I knew, Rick.
How does it fall out into your diaper or your nappy?
I can only speculate because I obviously don't do the surgeries. I've been a I guess a victim of the surgeries, but I don't. When I went in at 22, they were looking, the reason for the cystoscopy, which is the exploratory, was to see whether they could do any more for the bladder, because even up to this day, whatever comes into me is just urinated out into an incontinence pad. So I wanted to know if there was any way that they could, because it was a urological problem. I wasn't born with a gender problem, I was born with a urological problem of which they hadn't fixed. And they said there was nothing more they could do about that. But at the same time, he came back and he said, oh, I wanted to look to see if we could give you a vagina, because at this point I didn't know about the prolapse vagina as a kid. I didn't know about that. I just thought I had no vagina whatsoever. So he then tells me that the reason they can't make this vagina is because whatever it needs to be attached to on the inside, however they do it, there's not enough. There's nothing to weight it to. And I didn't explore and I didn't pry, because I found the whole thing so embarrassing, and just so incomprehensible. I'd not had the 15 years to process everything in the way I'd processed it now. It was basically like, la 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 la, whatever you're saying, it might be good, but I don't want to hear it, and that was how I was for so long. I wish I knew the technicalities more. I have friends with I know a couple of people that I'm friends with that are trans and have been through the surgeries, and the way I understand it is that it's essentially something you have to keep it maintained. It will close up if you don't dilate it. So it's almost like an open wound, which is, quite something.
Well, part of the reason I'm asking, because I think, I know there's an uncomfortableness here, or at least with me, but people
Don't
need
worry,
to
I'm all right.
people need to understand, because we're defying biology, and so we're creating something artificial. And when you defy truth and come up with this pseudo mechanism, there's going to be complications to it. And people need to know that. All right, so you are now in a doctor's office, and what age were you when you're looking at the screen, and this was this was the big moment for you when you realized that you're actually a boy. How old were you, and what is that scenario?
So I was age 22, and at the time I was actually in university. So I went to uni a bit late. So I think I'd have been in probably like second year of university. And I studied close to home. And I had I can't remember what the ailment was, but something very minor like sore throat, tonsillitis, something that you or I or anyone could have. And it wasn't going away. So I went to the doctors, and I never liked going to the doctors. I would always avoid going to the doctors. But I thought maybe I need some antibiotics or something. And my mum always accompanied me to the doctors as moral support. I guess as moral support, but maybe at the back of her mind, it was maybe one day she might see something that she shouldn't. I don't know. We've had these conversations, and my mum still maintains she came for moral support. But at 22, it's a bit strange taking your mum to the doctors. So we both arrived, we went in the clinic, and it was a locum. Over here we call it locum, but that's like a temporary physician. Do you know, when there's so many people that are out on holiday or they're understaffed, they get somebody from a bank in, to do the job. And she obviously, there must have been discussions in that surgery, which is, Sophie doesn't know, we don't tell Sophie. I'm sure there were discussions in there, probably even including my parents, But this day we went in, and on the screen, you've got the computer there, and you've got just the physician and me and my mum here all in front of the screen, and we're having a chat. And before the meeting, because she'd never seen me before, she's obviously looking through my medical records, and in 2 lines right in the middle of the letter, and it was the 2 lines that appear in the Daily Wire article, but essentially it was lots of medical language to say the removal of testes, a split penis, a vaginal construction, and XY chromosome. But there's lots of other medical speak in there. Bifid phallus is one of them, and it just sounds such a horrific thing, bifid phallus. Every time I say it, it just makes me laugh. But yeah, I saw that, and obviously at 22, you're old enough to know which chromosome is male and which is female. You're old enough to know, what a testes is and what penis is, and a vaginal construction. But do you know what? Seeing that was like it answered every single question I ever had in my mind, because
Right.
I didn't know what was going on, or what is this crazy condition I've got that no one seems to know a name of, where I've got no vagina, I'm urinary incontinent, I've got a fifth of the small intestine, and everything looks a bit different down there. If anything, this was actually as traumatic as it was. It clicked into place. I was like, this makes sense. But obviously it didn't make sense this makes sense, this is great. It's like, this makes sense, but how the hell am I going to deal with this? I can't deal with this. And I chose not to deal with it, Rick, didn't I? For so long, I just walked away. This didn't happen. It's almost like denial, isn't it?
Yeah. So in school in the UK, did you have gym or whatever you all call it? You were
Yeah.
in girls' showers? I mean, how did that work? I mean,
Yeah. Well,
it was obvious that, I mean, I'm different from them, or they see you unclothed. How does that work?
so we were quite lucky in the fact that I think in the UK we're probably slightly smellier and sweatier than you lot, because we did have showers in our in our school for, if you'd done, we call it PE, physical education over here, which
Yeah,
would be like
we
gym
do.
class.
We do too. Yeah, but it was 100 years ago when I took it, so I couldn't remember.
But I would always avoid, I would never have any situation where there's no way I was going to appear naked around anybody, because I knew it was
Okay.
different. I knew questions would be asked. So I would do my gym class. I would just literally get changed. But you'd do anything to get, you go find a toilet cubicle to do the bit where you have to sort of, take your shorts off, or you'd put a towel around you. And I say I was attracted to women, Rick. There was nothing going on in my head at that age thinking, oh, I'm looking at all these girls and they mean something to me. My thoughts in those locker rooms was, I need to keep as private as I possibly can, because and obviously I didn't know that I was male at that point, but I knew something was very wrong, and I knew that I'd be mocked by my peers at that age if
Right.
someone were to sort of see what's there, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So the language is so you saw on the screen. I don't think I can read this. 46 XY birth, previous ectopia, Vesicae,
I don't know how you
bifid
say it either.
phallus imperforate anus and prolapse bowel through abdominal defect, bladder reconstruction, testes, and phallus removed, vagina construction. And so that is what you saw. You
What I
hit
saw.
the roof when you got back in the car with your mom. And what did she say to you?
Well, it's difficult to remember the exact words, but we got in the, we kept it in the surgery. I didn't say anything, but she knew I'd seen it. And when we got in the car, I looked at her and she said, I think it was probably something along the lines of, listen to me, I can explain. Do you know, I think it was very soft. It was very kind. And I think she knew that this could be a make or break moment for our relationship for the rest of our life, really. And she wanted to diffuse the situation. She wanted to show me love. She wanted to help me with the trauma. But at that moment in time, I did not want to engage. I just shouted and screamed and swore and all manner of things. You know, I did what we learn not to do as we get older, which is to just transmute that. You should be taking that pain and trying to work through it and transmute goodness out the other end. But I literally took that pain and I just went onto mum, you know, just not physical. I would never hurt anyone, but I just swore. And then we got back to the house. I was living at their house at the time. And I went upstairs to my room. I slammed my door shut. She wanted to come in crying. I wouldn't let her in. And Dad came home from work. Dad worked in Sheffield. He came home from work early. She'd called him saying the thing we never wanted to happen has happened. And then they all tried to have a conversation with me. And I remember thinking, my life's never going to be the same. I don't know how I can handle this. And then I think the next day I took off university. And then the day after that, I just forgot everything I'd ever been told, forgot everything I'd read, put it into the Pandora's box, and I just carried on with my studies. And I never said a dicky bird to anyone, never said anything to anybody. But that trauma doesn't go away. You know, you work through it, and it's not always positively. So I might not have said anything to anyone, but I'd have smoked all of the cigarettes, I'd have done all of the cocaine, I'd have partied hard. You know, that pain goes somewhere, and that pain, if it's not been talked through, it gets absorbed and it eats away at you physically, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And because, again, from a Christian perspective, we're not built to carry those types of things. And so we cast those things on Christ. That was the purpose of him coming and dying, to take our sin, whether it's things that we do or things that are done to us. But if we don't have a way of casting those things off, in your case, casting off what was done to you, we can tend to atone for those things ourselves by punishing ourselves. Cutting is a common response, of course, alcohol, drugs, and so forth. When did you come around and start having a civil conversation with your parents? Was it soon, or did it take you a while before you all could sit down and talk through this?
I don't think we ever really did. And we made our peace with each other. We on both sides, we kind of made this. They saw that I'd buried it. I just buried it. And I decided I'm living under this roof. And you know, I still didn't, at that point, the trust had been broken. But I also started to think, well, I don't think these people ever meant to hurt me, because, you know, I look back through the Christmases and they'd taken me on wonderful holidays, wonderful gifts. I'd never wanted for anything, you know, the attention, the love that I'd had. Finding out that information was like the one time in my life that I felt let down by these people. Like, up until that time, they'd been amazing. So I think I knew instantly that this wasn't their fault and this wasn't caused by them. So eventually we made our peace in terms of me talking with them and getting along again. But we didn't do that really through talking about what happened to me and working through that trauma. I think I communicated to them that I never want to talk about this again. We're not talking about this again until I bring it up. Is that okay? Yeah, no problem. And then I was forced to bring it up. This is why I think, I never actually used to be, I shouldn't say this, but I never used to be religious, right? I never really had I couldn't grab onto anything. And now I don't know where I am religious wise, right? But I definitely believe there's a God. I definitely believe there's a God. God or a creator. But we have to go through all of these tribulations in order to, be enlightened or to be free of sin. And this box that I locked up of denial, and where you're saying I'm denying myself, but I'm also denying the truth to the world about who I am. My body forced me to address that, because we're in the middle of the pandemic and in the COVID situation. All of the hospitals are on complete lockdown in the fact that you can go in, you can't take a visitor in, no one can come visit you while you're in there. Now, previously, any medical appointments that I'd had to attend, and I'd tried to attend as minimal as possible, even after finding out, I would take my mum. I'd said, I'm having nothing to do with this. I will not talk about this. And my mum would speak for me, because I just couldn't address it. However, I had to go in, and basically I had a problem whereby I couldn't eat, and I was throwing up, and my stomach was going up and up and up and up and up and up. And I just felt like I was going to blow up, and I was sweating profusely. And then one day in the middle of the night, I woke up and my bed sheets were just covered. Despite having to wear an incontinence product for the urine, my bed sheets were covered in this really brown, putrid fluid. I went to the toilet, and I noticed in my genital area, I guess you could say where a vagina might be in a normal female, this hole had opened up, which we now know, the leading theory is that this was where they'd done the initial pseudo-vagina surgery, but then it'd gone back in and they just sewed it up. But that would have been a weak point of skin, because there'd been a surgery there. So what had happened, what we think happened is the leading prognosis is that this vagina, the pseudo-vagina that they put in as a baby, and then they said, well, just put it in to reabsorb it. The body had basically, it just been sat behind the scenes the whole time, obviously with no way of escaping this. It filled up with mucus and various other, crud that goes within this mass. And it had over the years gone from being this small thing to 25 centimeters. And because it was so full that it might burst, a few months prior, I'd been in with what I think was that leaking internally, but that's another story. But the body is so wonderful. It found this weakness in my genital area, and it had punctured it. And then it was a good thing, because it was getting rid of all of this putrid fluid that had gathered in here. And by the time I got into the hospital, I was actually feeling quite a bit better, because I'm there worried that I've got brown liquid coming out of a new hole, but I'm starting to feel a lot better. And that's because it's obviously found an escape route. You're not poisoning your body anymore. But what that presented to me is I had to go into the hospital that had no records of mine, because in the UK, it is incredibly difficult. All of the different hospital trusts and the GPs were not all wired up easily in terms of tech that you can access records from another trust, or they have to make a request, and then a couple of days later it comes over. It's all very, very slow. But I had to confront this. I had to say to the doctor, look, this has happened, but you're going to think this is nuts. I says, but when I was born, they changed my gender due to this cloacal exstrophy. I says, and I know I'm male. I said, and this is where potentially a vagina would be, but as far as I'm concerned, I've never had a vagina. I said, this putrid fluid's coming out. And the guy, he was very kind, but I think he thought it just admitted a mental health patient, right? So he could clearly see that physically something's completely wrong, but my story just to him was I don't think adding up. But then a couple of days later, he came to my bedside and he said, I put his hand on my shoulder, like, I'm so sorry. We've got your medical records from your GP, and the GP is general practitioner, so like first line support. He said, yeah, oh God, what a journey you've been on. He said, but what I do want to say is, he said, I've been a urologist for like all of my career, and he was in his 50s. He said, what happened to you was not normal, mate. Do you know, like, he says, if we part with anything, you need to look into that. And hearing a modern day urologist tell me that that's a met, that wasn't right, was that got me a new lease of motivation, because I thought, right, hang on a minute. So if this happened to me, it's probably happened to others. And it's right. That mindset of you can help others that just rocketed me through the handling the mental side of things. You know, these hope that if I can get my answers, I can get answers for other people, and potentially, you know, you say all of this mess, something good can come out of this mess. It hasn't just destroyed my life. It could actually be the making of me, because I can then go cast a bigger light from the back of it and be stronger, maybe.
Right. And so just as an aside, we'll pin this for a later date, but we can have that religious conversation at another podcast.
I'm up for that.
But there is truth I would believe that the Bible communicates truth. And what they did is they surgically attached you to their truth, which is not truth at all. And of course, you have seen the devastation of that. But now you're coming back to the truth that God has made us in his image. We're made a specific way. There is a process for handling the bad things that happen to us. And again, this is what the Bible would teach, but we can have that conversation later. Did you ever have that conversation with your parents as far as what happened, or is it still we love each other, but we haven't just had a sit down talk through this?
No, we worked through it. So when I ended up in the hospital, they drove me to the hospital and I got admitted. And then obviously I had to start talking with the doctors. But then that normalized it, and that it was a bit easier to talk to my parents, because if I just talk to a set of strangers, then I can talk to my parents. And when I came out of hospital, I was still in quite a bad way. But that's when, as a family, we started to do the real repair work. We were all fine with each other, but there was just an unspoken box, you know. But that's when we all, I mean, you know, my dad's not someone that cries, but we'd had conversations. We'd not been harming each other, but the emotion, you know, we all sat around, we had long conversations, and we all agreed off the back of, you know, sort of, we started to realize now that this probably was a bit of a medical experiment. And that's the first time any of us had really acknowledged that. My parents genuinely believed that they were doing the right thing and it was the only thing that they could do to resolve my problems. But even they could see at that point that, well, you're still incontinent and it was a urological problem, so they didn't fix that. And now you're having this problem where a surgery that you didn't need has now nearly given you sepsis. So that was a light bulb moment for them that this was all wrong. So we spent a lot of time, and it wasn't even arguing. It was just they poured their heart out about how hard it was to maintain that secret, and their biggest worry being that they'd have passed away and I'd have found out. And at that point, I wouldn't have been able to turn to them to get their rationale. And it'd been very easy to have demonized two people that actually had my best interests at heart. So there was a sense of relief from their part. And we worked through it. We didn't, you know, no counseling as a family or anything. We just did it together. And we all agreed at that point, after a few weeks of talking here and there, that the right thing to do is try to go public on this, in order, because if we go out with our story, other people will come out of the woodwork. And one thing we can go and help and support other people like me to get through the trauma. Anyone that's just found out, or you might have parents that know that haven't told their children, and that might make them reflect a little bit. I just thought there's so many lessons that some things we could achieve as a family. And we all just sat down one day, it was like, yeah, we're going to do it. And
Yeah,
that's
I
how it
agree.
started.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I've been counseling forever. And one of the things in counseling is that you want to let the person that you're talking to know that I'm really no different than anybody that I talk to. They struggle with fear. I struggle with fear. They struggle with shame. I struggle with shame. They struggle with anger. I struggle with anger. I mean, nobody is better than anybody else at this core heart level. And so we're all the same. But sometimes people can create this hierarchy where, well, this person has it together, and they can be inhibited from communicating what they really want to share. And so what I do as a counselor is to let them know that, you know, I'm just as fallible as you are. I struggle in certain ways. And I've seen this so often where that person you can just see their countenance change. It's like, oh, you too. And then they open up. And so I think you're spot on. As you continue to communicate, there are people that are pent up, bound up, and it's like there's something wrong. They can feel it. It's like having an amputated leg. It itches, but there's no leg there. It's a phantom pain. It's surreal. There's a lot of confusion there. And I think that will open doors for you. But some of those doors that will open will be the doors of adversity. And so have you experienced blowback from people because your message is antithetical to this cultural agenda, this zeitgeist that's really taking over the culture? You're going rogue in a sense. And so have you experienced adverse blowback?
I'll answer that as fully as I can. And when you say I'm going rogue, and I absolutely am, to be honest, because without going into any detail, there's a documentary that was underway going on, and it's we still all talk, but it was made very clear to me that how dangerous it would be to go out with my narrative, which I'm not holding an anti-trans narrative. I'm holding I think that I will come to that later, but I'll say I'm not holding an anti-trans narrative, but the advisors, the people around me that knew what they were doing, very much that if you go out with this, you're gonna get gunned in. And I know your intentions are good, but yeah, the trans movement's gonna jump on you. And I've been very blessed in the fact that I've been jumped on by the trans movement, but I've not been jumped on to the degree that could have been. And I think what I want to relate to on here, what I want to communicate is that, like, I respect every single human being's choice on this planet. I respect everyone's ability to have a choice, and I don't want to take any choices away. And I also respect people's opinions, but that shouldn't stop me speaking about my truths from what I've experienced. And my biggest worry is for older people. I'm just like, as long as you're informed, fine, whatever, just do what you need to do to be peaceful with yourself. But I can't understand how we've come to a world where doing some primitive surgery on genitals and pumping in some chemicals can be sufficiently communicated to people to believe that that is actually changing a chromosome, or it's not, but changing a gender. And I know it's not changing a chromosome, but to me, it's like we've packaged this thing and we've sold it in. But the reality of it is not that, and that's the main reason I'm here. Is I was saying I don't know. There's a million arguments around it, isn't there, Rick? We can talk about it in more detail if you want, but you choose which way you want to probe on it.
Well, I agree with your perspective, and I just did an interview earlier this morning with a gentleman, and we were talking about Christians have a perspective on life, but we don't mandate that. And so the illustration that I used with him, there's a scenario in the Gospels where Jesus was talking to a rich man, and Jesus said, "This is what you need to do. Go sell everything that you have and follow me." And the man went away because he did not want to give up his possessions. But Jesus did not run him down and say, "No, you will follow me."
Left it to free will.
Yeah, that's the Christian's deportment. And so I have an opinion on how things should be according to my epistemological perspective, my source of truth. But I don't sweat it. And we tell our children the same thing. It's like, this is what I believe, this is what we would prefer, this is what we teach, but you ultimately have to rise and stand to your own master. You have to make your own decisions. And as I tell our children, I will always love you, and there's nothing that you can do that will negate that love that I have for you. I might not agree with your positions, but again, I am not going to mandate. I don't do it in counseling. I don't do it in the general public. We don't do it to our children, but we have the freedom to share our perspective. And so you have the freedom to share your perspective. But as you say, there is, the word I used was zeitgeist. The spirit of this age is very strong, that's trying to censor people from having a perspective that's different from theirs. Now, you're on the front end of this, and so you've recently have come out over the past couple years or so. I can just see this thing really exploding for you in a positive way, but with that a greater awareness around the country, around the world. I can see the adversity coming, and I trust that you have people that you can speak with to help you to maintain reasonable sanity. I think about J.K. Rowling, who, just making a statement that she believes in, but she's not being unkind about it. But obviously the blowback is fierce because there's no tolerance for any kind of alternate opinion. And so as your message continues to leak out and people pick it up, and as I did from the Daily Wire, it's like, I want to talk to you. And there's going to be more of that coming on. Now you would, I mean, you also have to get in a good mental space to where you can receive this notoriety, and there's an element of fame to it. So there's a lot that you have to wrestle through, and I trust you have your team, your entourage that will, help
Oh,
you to
you'd be
work
shocked.
to why
It's most of the time.
shocked about what?
Look, it's literally the amount of people that have said, "Oh, there must be a team behind all of this," and like, no, it's just there's Sophie Ottaway in the back bedroom just trying to forge a path to how to use the right media outlets to get the right outcome, to see how we can educate the world. It's there's. I had a little bit of support from a documentary team for a while, but then our narratives became so separate that it's become very difficult to find alignment. So, and I've obviously partnered up with a few media outlets to do various things, and I've got to know those journalists, but there's no mental health department behind me. There's no team of media experts. It's literally just me and a computer. And, one thing I'm good at now is like, I'll talk to anyone. If I'm having a problem, I'll just talk. And I'm quite strong. I keep the message of love, I think.
All right. So Sophie, you need a team, but you'll work you'll work that out. If you ever, you're welcome to email me anytime if I can help. I'm not saying that I can, and I'm not being so arrogant to say that I can, but I have a growing affection. I have a growing affection for you and your story, and so if I can serve you, I would love to do that.
Thank you.
And so you and your parents are in a good spot then, eh?
Yeah, we're in a good spot. We're strong.
No, go ahead.
And we're all in line. Within the family, we all agree on the same, I say narrative, it's not a narrative, it's truth, but our three independent truths all align, and we all want the same thing. And we want to drive change for others. We want to drive awareness of what these surgeries are. We want to drive awareness of the fact that they were, we look at this, if you call it zeitgeist earlier, but this, epidemic of gender dysphoria that's going on now, and a big drive to conduct these surgeries and to lure people down the pathways of hormones and surgeries. Your followers might think I'm insane, but I firmly believe that, as with anything, you're a guy that works in tech in a lot of ways, aren't you? You've got a podcast, you've got a video cast. You need to prototype something, you need to test something before you roll something out. You're not. They needed to, in my mind, they could never have done transgender test surgeries on newborn babies. No mum would ever, for any money, even if you say $5 million, no mum is going to agree to that. So they're onto a loser there. However, if you want to recruit into your transgender experiment, then a poorly baby with a rare condition, with organs everywhere. And I believe that's what's happened. And I'm sure over the last 20, 37 years, whatever, those surgeries have improved. But we are still making physical changes that are, I can't get my head around how people think that changing something physical will affect the mental. But then maybe it does in some ways, because I know if you lose weight, you feel better about yourself. If you get some new clothes, you feel better about yourself. But I guess it's not up to me to question anybody's choices. I will love anybody as long as they're a good person. If they're going killing people, I don't love them. But as long as they're a person of love, I will love them. All I want is for my journey to inform the choices that people make, because I believe that the public information that people are consuming is an oversell, and it's not reality. And as we see from the detransitioners that you've been speaking to, I'm sure along the way, they've figured out quite quickly that they've been sold a Porsche and they've been delivered a used car from 20 years ago.
Yeah, they're similar to you as you went down the career path, money path, drug path, whatever. It comes back. Anytime that we deviate from truth, it's not going to satisfy. And so you've had that experience. I don't think you know much about my story, but I've had that experience as well. My father was an abusive drunk. I had two brothers who were murdered. I was in jail when I was 15 years old. I tell people I was in the pharmaceutical business when I was a teenager, which is a nice way of saying I smoked a lot of weed. But I was looking because of the abuse. A lot of it had to do with the abuse that I had from my father. That I was just looking for wholeness. I was looking for help, looking for hope, and so I went down all these deviant paths, thinking that marijuana is going to satisfy, acid is going to satisfy, ripping people off as I was a thief was going to satisfy. And of course ending up in jail. And so you had a moment of clarity. You had two moments of clarity looking at that screen in the doctor's office at 22, and then the doctor coming to your bedside and saying, hey, this is messed up, and you have a moment of clarity. For me, when I was in jail at 15, I realized that I'm an idiot. This is not the path that I want to go down. And so God began directing my path. I became a Christian when I was 25. And then at that juncture, my past all made sense. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'm the poster boy for dysfunction. And now I'm 64 years old. And so I can look in the rearview mirror, and it's very, very clear to me. I'm sorry, I think something just happened to my screen. I did my
The timing was spot on, though. Look in the rearview mirror, and then the fireworks came behind you, Rick.
Yeah, I just did a Mac update, and I don't like it. So I told Lucia, my wife, yesterday, I have to be careful with my hands, because if I hold my thumb up like this, then usually a thumb, there it is, that happens. And I don't like those gimmicks. And then I was talking to one of our web developers yesterday, and he said, well, if you go like this, stuff's going to happen behind your head. I did not mean to do that. And I can't remember how I did it just now. But anyway, I digress. But now as I look in the rearview mirror, I see that the point of it all, God was leading me, that I would spend my entire adult life helping people who are struggling with issues. And so I don't see my past, as some penalty or, some undue hardship. It's all part of a redemptive plan. Now, for you, you've had those moments of clarity, as I mentioned, when you're looking at the screen, it's like, boom, okay, now things are starting to make sense. It crystallizes in your mind. Of course, now you've got to deal with it. Everything has just changed for you. And so you process through that. Now, the second moment of clarity, this gentleman, this doctor is standing there at your bedside, and he's saying, wow, this is messed up. I read your records, and you're not insane. Somebody did something very bad to you. That set you on a path. Now, as I was reading your article, you connected with a friend, right? Or you talked to somebody, and eventually it led to John Money, which it seems to be where all stories seem to go to Johns Hopkins and John Money and the Reimer twins. And so you can fill in the gaps there. I'm skipping the rock across the pond, but you can tell
you're doing a great job. A really great job. So in my business at the time, you do contracts, and it was all fully remote, in the pandemic. And I confided in a work colleague about what had happened. I'd been in the hospital because I've been off work for maybe a couple of weeks because I've been so poorly. And then obviously you hear back and everyone wants to know what's wrong. So I came clean with my work colleague. I said, well, I've been carrying this trauma for years. I'm going to tell you this happened to me. And she well, in my line of work, my old line of work, I used to work with user researchers. So what they used to do is they'd go and form question sets to understand user needs from people for building new software products. So, but her background was in psychology, and she'd even lectured psychology for the Open University. And she said, do you know what? She says, your story, she says, there's a massive case study in the psychology degrees about David Reimer. Do you know who he is? I was like, I've never heard of David Reimer. She's like, sends me a million links. I work through the links, and then obviously you get onto the John Money train, and then it gets me looking through loads of papers from Johns Hopkins, looking around the other people that are involved at the time, such as Milton Diamond, who was another researcher at the time, he was openly, clearly going up against Dr. Money, showing that he'd proven in rats that nature prevailed over nurture, but Dr. Money just kept batting him away. And I've had conversations with various people in these spaces. Obviously, we can't speak to John Money, who's dead, but I've spoken to a member of the extended Reimer family over this period of time. A lady I was working with on the documentary at the time, she's spoken to other physicians, that were going up against John Money to try and understand his mindset. So I feel like I've built a picture in my mind of quite what that landscape looked like. And you're absolutely right. In all roads lead back to John Money. However, I don't know if he's probably not the outlet to talk about it, but I see the media as you've got the main story here, and then people that don't believe the main story, they go do their own research and they're going to arrive at another story. And I believe that both sides are probably controlled by a similar force. So the controlled opposition is going to give you 95% of the truth, but you're not going to get the nugget that's going to be the thing you can work on. Now, we look at the media at the moment, there's a great story that we can pin the tail on John Money for everything that's gone wrong. And this is great, right? Because he's dead now and that's fine. And he's not alive. And he was a rogue doctor, case closed. And that's really handy for Johns Hopkins, that is, because you're not telling me that a man that spent over 50 years of his career in that institution, governed by that institution, funded by that institution, regulated by that institution, no one, even in the, I had to push hard to get Johns Hopkins into that Daily Wire piece. I had to push really hard. No one wants people to go there. And no one wants people to go there because if people look in there deep enough, I am absolutely certain you're going to find some real truths in that institution. And that probably puts me in danger pushing that narrative, but I'm going to push it.
And that's what I was saying earlier. You and your team, which apparently it's you, yourself, and me, myself, and I.
And my 50 personality.
Your multiple personalities. Did you say that you had to push to get on the Daily Wire, or was that hard to get on their platform?
So Daily Wire were great. They've been fantastic. I've not got anything bad. They've been amazing. We just had to be fair, they were very, very good actually. But the only thing that was going to be removed from my piece was speaking about Johns Hopkins, and I had to push to get Johns Hopkins in. But credit to them, they pushed it for me and we got it in. But there was probably nothing dodgy around that, but I got on my high horse and I spoke to them and I was like, it's so important we get Hopkins in, because if we don't get Hopkins in, everyone just believes the buck stops at John Money, and that's going to stop. We need, if we are looking at trying to find the truth, we need to go into the institution. But no, I don't want to sham Daily Wire. They were really good, and the guy I worked with on the piece it was great.
Do you have a job?
There's a good question, actually. So I had a business up until May of this year. That business was sort of creating, gov.uk over here? It's like the UK government website. They contract that out to big consultancies, and then those big consultancies have permanent staff, but they also subcontract that out to small businesses. I was one of those small businesses that they call it user experience design, but you basically designed prototypes for online transactions. And I've been doing that for the best part of 10 years. But I firmly believe that our government has gotten so rotten now, so against the public, and I've seen many things that I'm not going to talk about on here because I think I'm whistleblowing enough. Let's just say I've seen enough to make me believe that I can never, ever, ever have anything to do with the UK government again. And if we talk about, you talk about like sinning, but when but also enlightenment, and you can't make a change if you don't realize that you're doing something bad. But the second you realize that you are doing something bad, it's your responsibility to remove yourself from the situation. And I've come to the conclusion that the last 10 years, not all of what I did, but a lot of those projects I were working on, you only get given the small little bit of the massive piece, right? So you don't realize it's nefarious until you see the bigger picture later on. And after the pandemic, and after I've seen what's happening in UK government, in May I took the decision that I can't work with them again. So my business is just completely on pause, and I'm living off the money that I earned during that period of time, really, which one day will run out. But I'm not worried about money because I believe, well, one, you don't need money really. You just need love and you need shelter. And two, I'm a firm believer that you shouldn't have a scarcity mentality. If you do the right thing and follow your heart and do what's morally right, then God will give you what you need to survive. So I'm trying to live in a mentality of abundance these days. If you look at my bank account, I'm definitely not in abundance, but I'm quite happy and positive about it.
Is there a book forthcoming?
Good question. Really good question. I've been approached by several people about a book. Different people wanting to work with me to either ghostwrite or publish. I'm up for it. I'm not sure that I've found the right way of doing it yet, but it's I never say never. I think it's coming, but it's not actually, it's not in process, but I think it'll happen.
Yeah, and the Daily Wire does publish certain books, and so you already have your foot in the door as far as a publisher is concerned. But there would be others as well that I'm sure would want to pick you up. When you get that draft ready, I would love to review it for you, and so you can send it to me. And I would love to have my name.
You'll
on the
get a
back.
copy.
I'd like to have my name on the back cover of reviewing it because I believe in what you're doing, and just really impressed. If we can serve you, I don't know what that would look like, but if we can serve you in any way, or if you want to pop a question to me sometime, or just feel free to do that. I will follow your career, obviously, and maybe we can do this again at another time. You are just a complete delight, joy.
You too.
Love that accent. I picked up a few words, nappy, and a couple other words. I might put them into my vocabulary. And by the way, if you're ever on holiday in the States, you're welcome to stay with our family. We'll give you free board and lodging. And
likewise, if you're ever over here,
we love for people stay with us, and we have we love to give travelers rest. And so if you're ever on holiday and you're in South Carolina, if you need a night or two, you got free Airbnb here, and so you're welcome to have that. And I mean that seriously. We have some people coming in November. We love hosting people, and you're welcome to stay here if you're ever here on holiday.
I think after what I've said about Johns Hopkins University, they won't be giving me a travel visa into the United States anytime soon, but it's a very kind offer. I'm genuinely hearing about people not getting ESTAs over the political views that they're holding at the minute. But that's another story in itself.
Yeah, it's a sad situation. Sophie, thank you so much. And God bless. It certainly has been a pleasure. And thank you for being on Life Over Coffee.
Thanks for having me. You take care, Rick, and thank you for watching.
Thanks for joining us. Learn more and get access to other resources at lifeovercoffee.com.